Welcome to our afternoon panel on Nigerian stability and the Boko Haram insurgency. In order to keep the time, we'll move through the presentations following the order in the program. There are a few additions or changes, and I'll go through that when we hit them. Everyone will have about 15 minutes to present, and if this works according to time, we'll have at least a half an hour for discussion at the end.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My paper is divided into 5 subheadings. The introduction, then Boko Haram, the introduction, Boko Haram, Western education, or Westernization, Boko Haram, religion and phenomenon, genesis of conflict of Boko Haram's conflict, operation, and targets. Then overcoming Boko Haram, and then the conclusion. As I started this paper, said that Nigeria became very popular nowadays because of Boko Haram insurgency. You know, what is new in Western media is the terrible events in Africa. They never report any good things about us, but anything that is derogatory or contemptuous or evil, you quickly hear it. And, but everybody knows that Boko Haram, the way it started was not intentionally evil. But as time went on, it became an evil organization. Now, Boko Haram, if you take your mindset and look at how it started like any other religion. Religion, the way I see it, is like an invention. Religion is an invention of human mind. And what does it intend to do? It tends to assist man to live with the difficulties he finds in his environment. And as I've said, religion gives us an insight, an ability to cope with our fears, and to make us live in harmony, with peace and harmony. However, when religion turns out not to be favorable to the original intention of what religion is supposed to be, then it becomes violent. It destroys the unity, it destroys the fabric of the society itself. Just as science and technology that we develop through invention, we use these technologies to give us comfort and to make us live a life of longevity and be happy with ourselves. However, when technology is not used properly, it can cause havoc. Just as we have seen in our lives, United States, in Japan, everywhere, when America went to drop bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's a misuse of human invention. Similarly, the use of chemical weapons is another thing that can destroy us. So when we misuse religion, it is like misusing technology. Technology destroys our environment, and we are suffering from that aspect of misuse of technology. When Boko Haram began in 2002, it was a religious organization doing a local preaching, using the limited knowledge the leaders had to convince people that they have to live a religious life which Muhammad introduced. But then due to their ignorance of that religion, I would say, with some political motivation, thing became a misuse and abuse of religion. But the first thing that really caused the conflict between the Boko Haram, but first of all, let me tell you what it means. I assume everybody knows what Boko Haram is. Okay, but Boko is an Hausa word, which means westernization, Western education. And Haram means forbidden, which if you put the two together, Western education is forbidden. Now, what really caused the conflict between Boko Haram insurgent group, Boko Haram movement, and the federal government agencies was that in 2009, their leader was killed, Muhammad Yusuf. And why was he killed? Well, the Boko Haram groups, they violated simple rule in Borno State that the Okada riders, the motorbike riders are supposed to use helmets. So, but then a number of them didn't use helmets, so they were arrested. When they were arrested, they were severely punished. So then when Yusuf heard of what happened, he tried to solve the problem. But initially, he wasn't around, but later he came back. But he wanted to participate in solving the problem. He was arrested and killed. So the right of Yusuf was actually violated. Okay? If Yusuf and his group violated traffic rules and regulations, they're supposed to be treated like any other individuals so that they are punished for that offense. But to resort to killing the individuals, I consider it a violation of their rights. So they decided that since their leaders was killed, they are going to retaliate. They are going to avenge the anger, and the best place to begin was the police. So they went to police installations, and anywhere they saw police, they killed them. So government did not do anything on time, and it was going on and going on. Some politicians had interest in the activities of Boko Haram because they thought that the people in this did not supposed to be in power. But Jonathan did not allow them. But they wanted 4 years to go so that they could take power from the Southerners. Unfortunately for Jonathan, he agreed to step down after 4 years, but then he decided to continue. And then the first thing to do was to use this violent group to make him unsuccessful in his second term bid. So then the question of the 200 or over 200 schoolgirls became the most tragic and the one that really touched the heart of every individual anywhere in the world. But our president, the commander-in-chief of armed forces, did not take the issue seriously. He thought it was a joke that over 200 schoolgirls could be taken where there was an emergency rule. Where we have emergency rule in Yobe and Adamawa and Borno, it couldn't happen. So the president didn't think that such a thing could happen. He got it wrong. His security agents and information gathering apparatus did not give him the correct information. So he didn't take any action on time. But then some leaders went to him to tell him that, look, you should do something. I remember Chief Obasanjo told the whole world that he advised him to take a drastic action. If he had taken a drastic action to stop those people who kidnapped the girls, the problem would have been nipped at the bud. But he didn't. Thirdly, the Boko Haram group felt that the people in government should be involved. They have their agents, and then they use their own people, the politicians who supported them. But then they asked the president, these people, do you know them? He said, yes, they are in his government. They are in his cabinet. They are in the army. They are in the police. So if they are in those places, why did you use them to stop the crisis that they were, they have already started to disgrace the country, or embarrass the country. But he didn't do anything. He didn't arrest those people who were in his cabinet. He didn't deal with anybody that could be an example to threaten others and to stop it. He didn't. So Boko Haram now decided to be more forceful, and we were told, as from my research, that some of these military officers were involved. They were actually arming the Boko Haram movement groups, and they were actually selling arms to them, and then they became more powerful. And consequently, Boko Haram started to become a terror. So you remember in the news and everywhere that not only that they captured those, kidnapped those two girls, but then they went to United Nations building in Abuja and bombed it. They went to Air Force in Jaji and caused havoc. And then they became very explosive. And at the motor park, they have all these local-made bombs, and they have killed at least 100,000 people. Now, by the time the federal government wanted to act, it was getting too late. Then my argument is, how do we overcome Boko Haram and any other insurgent groups? First, we have to deal with the mindset of these people. First, we have to deal with the mindset of these people. Their understanding of Quran, the use of jihad and Sharia laws, they have to be contextualized within the context of Nigerian constitution and the lifestyle of the people. That is to say that the interpretation of jihad is supposed to be an internal struggle to overcome personal greed and personal discontent with life itself. And the Sharia law are supposed to be within the confines of the Nigerian constitution. It has ever been like that. Like the common, we call it our local laws, okay, should be treated as such. Not that women should be disallowed from talking, from participating in political life, then discouraging Western education, whereas they have used Western education for the arms they buy, the clothes they wear, the machines they use, and the trucks they use. They are Western education products. So, but then if you don't decolonize the minds of these young ones, then they will continue to be a threat to the unity and harmony of Nigeria. Another thing that we need to do is that we need to educate them in such a way that they will be taken from freedom from to freedom to. I use two terms, freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from misunderstanding of what life is, to freedom to where understanding and Western education can be of a remedy to their ignorance. And there was another thing that I want to talk about is that the politicians themselves who use this, am I using too much of my time? Okay. The politicians themselves who use these Boko Haram elements, they cause the problem. Because these Boko Haram groups, they have seen the lifestyle of these people. Their areas are not developed. They are backward. Now, the question is, the federal allocation given to each governor, each local government in Yobe, in Borno, in Adamawa, what happened to the money? They should have used the money for the development of these people. If these individuals that became terrorists in our society have been put in proper schools, proper environment to reason, they will not be doing all this. If they are properly engaged, because we can utilize the kind of knowledge they have and tap the resources for the development of the area and Nigeria in general. But the politicians, they go into those places with 5, 20, 30 vehicles and then display money. And because of the money they have, wealth they have displayed, they too wanted to be like everybody. So the best way is to fight government. So I have 2 minutes. Let me quickly go to my conclusion. I want to read it because it's my recommendation. There is no doubt that Boko Haram and all its affiliates have violated the rights of the citizens of Nigeria, particularly the 276 Chibok schoolgirls who were kidnapped as they were preparing for their school start exams. The Boko Haram extremists use violent means to demand for their rights instead of applying legal provisions indicated in the 1999 Constitution of Nigeria state. There is no justifiable reason for Boko Haram insurgents to want to secede from the corporate unit of the country by the use of coercion or war without facing a more preemptive force by the federal government to crush their insurgency. If the leadership of Boko Haram had engaged in a non-violent strategy, as I have argued in this paper, their grievances would have invoked sympathy, but having taken a monumental destructive course of action, there is no need to listen to their grievances. The application of Machiavellian principle to put an end to the brutal forces of Boko Haram appears to be the only solution to the federal government has in its arsenal. To allow peace to reign, particularly in the northern part of the country. Besides, the use of force to deal with any religious uprising, as it is argued in this paper, that there is need to change the mindset of the people, without which there will always be religious conflict in the country. Wale Soyinka's view in this regard is noteworthy, and I quote, "It will serve to remind us that we are a people to whom tolerance is a norm, knowledge an eternal pursuit, and pluralism a foundation of a communal ethos. Such monuments will represent milestones of the human journey towards enlightenment, a shrine to the real matters of human civilization," end of quote. For the Federal Republic of Nigeria to preserve the collective social, moral, religious, and intellectual values as espoused by Soyinka, in my view, a proactive means to provide basic infrastructural needs, which include healthcare, clean water, food and housing, free education for the populace, and a continuous effort to reduce corruption that hinders development. And more importantly, Nigerian leaders have to build a strong and effective institution, strong and effective institutions that will prevent religious groups like Boko Haram from sprouting in different parts of the country and becoming a threat to the harmony and unity of the nation. Thank you very much.
I am Chukwudi, Osondu. My paper is on conflict, insecurity, and sustainable development in Africa. The Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria. As a way of introduction, this paper observes that Africa has been diagnosed of widespread poverty caused by, among other factors, decades of conflict and insecurity of its citizens. The paper observes that national security translated into law and order is a fulcrum of national development and survival. The insecurity and conflict are antithetical to development. The lack of stability in any polity hinders sustainable development. Nigeria as a nation has been grappling with development since its political independence in 1960. Something that was obvious in Nigeria was that at independence, the North was considered to be behind the South, most of the South, in most of the indices of development, especially in the area of Western education and infrastructure. The successive Nigerian government have, from inception, embarked on mechanisms and policies that are geared towards national development, with education at the center. If we look at the national policy on education, 1973, it so much emphasized education as a vehicle to national development. The Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria, before the Boko Haram became an issue in Nigeria, Nigeria has contended with many other conflicts in its 5.5 decades of existence. We've had the Nigerian Biafran War, which some call the Nigerian Civil War. The Maidasine Islamic uprising was something close to Boko Haram when it started, but was crushed. Of very recent, we've had the Niger Delta conflict, and then the Boko Haram insurgency. Boko Haram has festered and expanded over the years, carving out a territory within the state of Nigeria. At inception, the targets of Boko Haram were limited to schools, colleges, universities, churches, banks, government institutions, like the police stations, and international organization offices, like the one on United Nations Secretariat or office located in Abuja. These targets for Boko Haram are deemed as institutions propagating Western values. Later, the Boko Haram diversified and started targeting mosques, motor parks, markets, towns, villages, communities, started engaging in kidnappings of locals and foreigners. At this stage, what the Boko Haram was seeking was more global attention and causing more collateral damage. Boko Haram and development in Nigeria. The impact of Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria can be discussed under three major subheadings, three major levels of impact: the level of the individual, the level of the society, and at the level of the Commonwealth, that is the nation Nigeria. At the individual level, the Boko Haram impacted individuals by way of loss of lives. In fact, in 2014, Boko Haram caused about 48% of civilian deaths in African conflicts, totaling about 6,347. Between 2011 and 2014, civilians who have died as a result of this insurgency is put around 10,500. There is loss to livelihood. A lot of individuals living in the affected areas lost their means of livelihood. There is frustration of individual dreams, especially when schools had to be closed following the adoption and attacks on schools and colleges and the institutions of learning. And there is dislocations and displacements. In the 3 states where Boko Haram is infested, about 1.7 million people have been displaced. Some had to be located within IDPs, entirely displaced camps in Nigeria, while others crossed into Chad and Cameroon, and some were able to get into Niger. There is the Boko Haram impact at the social level. It ignites fear, ignites hate, suspicion. There is tension among nationalities in Nigeria because there are individuals from other parts of the country who were casualties. The Niger Delta region started talking about possibility of going back to the creeks. There is this articulation. Businesses were closed, especially the SMEs in the north. Banks were closed, and individuals had to shut down businesses to move back to their zones and areas. There is communal tension in the IDP camps because of a mixture of different people coming from Borno, Adamawa, Yobe, meeting together in the camp where nobody is able to demarcate the boundaries. There is demobilization. That is mass exodus. Most people from southern part of the country had to move back to their states or to other parts of the country where there is no conflict. Then when we talk about the Commonwealth, the impact of Boko Haram on Nigeria and as it impacts development, the loss of human capital. We've said earlier that over 10,000 civilians had died between 2011 and 2014. Again, there is the diversion of resources to the conflict. The government is investing hugely in tackling the insurgency. If we look at the budget, when you look at 2013, 950 billion federal budget, 968.127 billion in 2014, and the borrowing in 2014 of $1 billion, all for defense, to tackle the Boko Haram insurgency. There is even a threat at dismembering the country. The Igbos started talking. The drums of war was beating and people were saying, I'm going back to my place. These people could not accommodate us. Then the threat to the sovereignty and national security. It may interest us that Boko Haram declared a caliphate within Nigeria, occupying 17 local governments, about 20 square miles within Nigeria. Then investors were lost. Now, in conclusion, because of one time, serious setback have been dealt on Nigerian development efforts. Insurgency may not be easily defeated because currently the Boko Haram is no longer a Nigerian insurgency. He has pledged allegiance to ISIS, and ISIS has accepted that. And the command structure has shifted from within the country to Libya. And then the Islamic Jihad of the Maghreb is equally connected. Then dealing with insurgency and security challenges, the following may be imperative. There should be decisive military action. There should be an improved governance. Training and equipping the military adequately be very important. In enhancing social welfare, thereby mitigating the level of poverty in the polity, eliminating corruption in government businesses, designing and implementing an economic mechanism to rebuild the northeastern part of Nigeria and to assist those affected. And very importantly, it will be very important to discuss the terms of continued existence of the Nigerian project, restructuring the country in line with the outcome of such discussion. Thank you.
Gandu's title is Education and Insurgency, the Northeast Geopolitical Zone of Nigeria. The paper investigates. Now, before I go to that, I'd like to make some clarifications as to the origin of Boko Haram, since this paper is also discussing the issue of insurgency, which is that of the Boko Haram. The original notion of the Boko Haram had nothing to do with Western education at all. The name Boko Haram emerged only as a convenience to describe what was going on among the Yusufia group. The original title of that group was Jama'atu al-Sunnah Lidawati wal Jihad. And it was called al-Yusufia because the leader and founder of that group was Yusuf, who was killed in one of the crises that occurred in Maiduguri. Now, these were a group who came out with their own interpretation of a portion of the Quran that talks about the jihad, which means fighting a holy war. However, the name Boko Haram arose as a result of Yusuf, who also had attained a master's degree in engineering, who tore his certificates. And it was as a result of a sore relationship that came up between him and the political enclave that were using him to oppress other opponents, opposition. And they had promised him a lot of things since he had a certificate, which they never gave him when they got into power. And in retaliation to that, he felt the certificate was useless and he tore his certificate. However, the group had already been in existence before. So it was that convenience that the Boko Haram name or tag came up, and it became a popular name, and up to today, it's called Boko Haram. And since the definition or the interpretation, the literal interpretation of Boko and Haram is that Western education is forbidden, and that is why everybody calls them Boko Haram. The paper investigates ways in which insurgency operation has undermined educational development and its functioning in the northeastern geopolitical zone of Nigeria. Using qualitative data sources, parents and education managers were interviewed. Now, the effect of insurgency is pronounced as a lot of destruction destruction of educational infrastructure. And in various in-depth interviews conducted, one with the principal, quote, this is what the principal had to say, that the insurgents always set schools ablaze and shoot sporadically. In Borno State, where more than 900 schools have been destroyed, all public schools have been closed since March 2014. Many attacks have killed pupils and teachers. Where schools are in session, it has affected and is still affecting the functioning of children and teachers in such areas who live in continuous fear, as a fear of the unknown. The fear of Boko Haram has forced many parents to withdraw children from schools. This has added to an already existing large number of out-of-school children. This was a statement by a principal and another teacher, one in Borno State and one in Adamawa State. The attack is sporadic. Nobody can say this is where the next attack will be or when it will come. I cannot send my children to school under such circumstances. This was also a reaction of a parent. Now, the question is, having known the fact that northern Nigeria has been classified as with a disadvantage in education, as even pointed out in the paper presented by Professor Osondu, now that there is constant fear of the unknown and the fact that the target has been schools with the abduction of the Chibok girls in school, no parent in these states is willing to send his child to school. And a lot of the infrastructure that is to be used by these students, these children, if even you send them to school, have been vandalized, have been destroyed, and as such, the effects on the educational development of the northeastern states of Nigeria is something that demands urgent attention. And like he stated, the internally displaced persons who are now in camps, most of the educators in that area have resorted to refugee camps in order to make the children get some degree of education. Insurgency has ended up reducing children enrollment in school. That is the extent to which insurgency has affected the educational status of children from the northeastern geopolitical zone. That's how far I can go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a change. We have an addition. Professor Aideyan is going to present on Turning the Corner in Africa's Development State, Insights from Political Elasticity. Welcome.
Thank you for coming to our panel. My name is Osaore Aideyan. I teach and research politics and government at Illinois State University. My research interest is trying to understand, you can hear me? Okay. It's trying to understand the social and institutional basis of development. What are the constraints of development and how can we remove these constraints? And when you go down the funnel, I'm more interested in how we can build poverty reduction programs to address these problems as well. Yeah. But today, originally, please, my paper was focusing on bringing Nigeria back from the brink. But after the election, I had to change the title of my paper to reflect more of the general trend in Africa, but focusing strictly on Nigeria. Hopefully, the new president and all about expectations can begin to get the country on the right track. So my paper is titled Turning the Course in Africa's Developmental State, Insights from Political Elasticity Theory. What is political elasticity theory? The theory argues in a nutshell that as societies become wealthier, politics takes on the size of balloons and rubber bands. In other words, leaders, those in authority, they begin to strive to strike a balance between competition and consensus. So until African countries begin to see democracy as a way of integrating society or bringing society together or creating incentives and structures that addresses the problems between leaders and followers, the goal of development will always evade the continent. And political elasticity theory, I didn't develop it, it's developed by Herbert Welling in 2003. It's actually a theory of governance. What I want to do is to initially just talk about the general problems in the continent and the kind of solutions people have come up with in terms of explaining the problems and how the concept of good governance came in and how the concept of good governance got lost in the way and how political elasticity theory can actually aid us in bringing back the concept of good governance. And in this case, it develops some attributes, some normative attributes, please, of what we can do as Africans to begin to remove those obstacles that are detrimental to societal well-being and economic growth. Now, we all know general statistics about development in Africa. Life expectancy is very low, literacy rates very low, people are not safe, civil rights and political rights and civil liberties are some of the lowest. Until recently, we had the slowest economies in the world. When I say until recently, we know that some African economies have been doing pretty well of late. Now, what explains these low levels of development in Africa? People have canvassed issues like slavery, colonialism, heterogeneity, ethnic identities. We've talked about culture, and most recently, we've talked about democracy, the absence or the presence of democracy. But one general consensus in the development community is that there is a political obstacle. There's a general political obstacle to development in the continent. Herbert Welling actually calls this the political sickness of poor countries, not just Africa alone. And how do this political sickness, how are they manifested? Improper policies, weak bureaucracies, inadequate supervision, illegitimacy of the state, laws and regulations, and finally, lack of independent and autonomous spheres of power, please. Nicholas van der Waal, Pierre Engelbert, Dunn and Chase, and Collier and Goning, they've done a lot of work in this area. Yeah. So, what is the solution to these problems, this political sickness in Africa and poor countries? In 1989, the World Bank, in recognition of this political problem, consulted a group of African scholars. I remember Claude Ake and but late now, and Professor Ali Mazuri were contracted to write a position paper on what they consider as the political problems facing Africa. And this concept of good governance actually was developed by Africans. It was not developed by the West. Yes. The whole idea of good governance was to address the problem between society and the leaders. In other words, how do we begin to remove those obstacles that create incentives for African leaders and leaders in poor countries to behave in an arbitrary and in an absolute way? A consequence, of course, of the colonization in the continent. So, these group of African scholars, they decided that to remove these obstacles, good governance, the exercise of political authority, should have the following attributes. One, it should be developmental, it should be democratic, and finally, it should be inclusive. That is how the African scholars came up with the notion of good governance. So the World Bank accepted it against all odds. The World Bank, like we all know, they believe in crunching numbers. Anything, any concept that is not that cannot be manipulated, that cannot be crunched, does not come into their radar. So the World Bank in 1989 came out with a study on economic crisis and growth in Africa. What is the solution? And they recognized that the biggest obstacle to Africa's development was politics. Now, in the course of developing or helping Africans through structural adjustment program, the IMF, the twin sister of the World Bank, they now narrowed down the concept of good governance to two things. One, administration. African countries are not being properly administered. And secondly, they tied it to the notion of aid. In other words, good governance was now subsumed to aid conditionality. Except you do X and Y, we're not going to give you any more financial aid. Then the international donor community subsumed good governance into liberal democracy. Yeah, liberal democracy, as we know it, emphasizes so much competition. Yes. And this is where the problem comes in the case of Nigeria. Politics has become a very difficult and a very dirty game in Nigeria, only because it stresses competition as opposed to consensus. I'm sorry, please. As opposed to consensus. So political elasticity theory is telling us that we have to strike a balance between competition and consensus. Now, what does the record show when African countries were encouraged to adopt good governance? The record shows that except for Ghana and Rwanda, the other countries have actually underperformed, looking at those three indicators or those three measures of good governance. As I said, the reason they have underperformed is because good governance has been narrowed to aid conditionality, and it's now synonymous with liberal democracy. So how do we begin to bring back the original conception of good governance? This is where the political elasticity theory comes in. I still have some time? In a nutshell, the core of the theory states that countries remain poor to the extent that those in authority place emphasis on the societal sources that undermine political software. Please pay attention to my concepts. There are going to be very many, but you know most of them. There's something we all relate with. Political software are those policies and practices that foster respectful relations between leaders and followers. This form of relations, also called soft power, second concept, of political power, links incentives to persuasion. Yeah, as I told you a while ago, politics is very dirty and very difficult in Africa, in Nigeria in particular. Yeah, rather than relating to Nigerians as equals, political leaders treat Nigerians as, the colonial masters did. They're just subjects, yeah, except for the difference in skin, yeah. There are no incentives for them to change. The opposite of soft power is the hard form of political power, also known as political hardware. These are forms of organization, regulation, processes, and technology that undermine growth and well-being in the continent. So how do we relate this small presentation of what the theory, the political elasticity theory is about to the Nigerian situation? We can see that it provides us insight in how we can address issues of corruption, decentralization, and democracy. But because I don't have enough time, I'm just going to quickly touch on two things, corruption and democracy. The first one, democracy. There is so much emphasis on liberal democracy rather than the concept of classical democracy. Classical democracy has the following attributes. It uses persuasion, and to a large extent, to some extent, please, coercion. That is what has been the foundation of the success of countries like Singapore and Japan. Yeah. When it comes to corruption, what we have seen, excuse me, please, is that we lack things like whistleblowers. A lot of us Americans are very familiar with this. Yeah. We don't have investigative journalists to kind of set the beam light on those who are corrupt. We don't have public prosecutors in Africa. These are ways we can reduce corruption. And what we have mostly are clientelistic and patronage relationship between the leaders and the followers. The other thing is that corruption is not destigmatized in a place like Nigeria. So what political elasticity theory tells us is that we can begin to build these institutions, these rules and regulations along these lines, yeah, where there is so much respect for the citizens. And at the same time, citizens know that there's an obligation for them to perform, to keep the state running. What I want to do here is to kind of keep quiet, and hopefully during the Q&A session, I might be able to elaborate a little bit more on what the political elasticity theory provides us in trying to get Nigeria back from the brink. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, and we're so happy that you joined our panel. We do have one last addition. Professor Sylvester Gunduna is presenting on democracy, electoral politics, and Nigeria's Fourth Republic. Welcome.
Panel member who could not attend. The title, as stated, is Democracy, Electoral Politics in Nigeria's Fourth Republic. And this paper seeks to explain the character of Nigeria's democracy, electoral politics, which is seen as an avenue for the enrichment of selected few who find themselves in political office where they get to determine resource distribution and allocation, usually in their interest. And instead of the interest of the overall development of the Nigerian state and society. The paper has analyzed that because of the lucrative nature of political office, individuals, groups, and political parties go into elections with the mindset to capture and retain power by all means necessary. And the paper has evaluated the doctrine of democracy as being the sovereignty and freedom of the people to control their economic activities, decide for themselves the laws they will have, the customs they will follow in their political system. And I think the paper uses political interaction framework as a base for the theoretical foundation, and concludes that the success of the Fourth Republic is dependent upon the tenet of sound democratic institutions like orderly transition, free and fair election, and good governance as a vehicle to sustainable democracy and development. Now, the paper has adopted the political interaction framework as the theoretical base for the synthesis and analysis of the work. And the framework presumes that state-society relationship is central to the understanding and political dynamics of Africa. And the framework is of the view that individuals and governments are constrained by a variety of demographic, technological, ideological, global, historical, and social factors. And by looking at the interaction of social forces, economic activities, formal institutions, and prevalent values, we stand a better chance of understanding the meaning and direction of the diverse patterns that evolved in Africa since independence. And the political interaction approach, therefore, centers on identifying the multiple factors at work on the African political scene and tracing their diverse dynamics over time. Now, a famous, this subsection is titled The Military and Politics of Transition. And it says a famous political scientist, James O'Connell, once spoke of instability as one of the problems feeding the canker of, the canker worm feeding on the apple of state formation in new states. He made it clear that instability itself is is not necessarily a negative fruit, because it is part of the excruciating process of the birth of the ideas of state formation. And then transition and changes are byproducts of instability. Now, a central issue the paper deals with is rigging elections in the Fourth Republic, and the political implications of that. And it outlines that the process of rigging kind of makes it impossible for people to genuinely participate in some of these elections. And the implication of this development is that most political parties who usually want to stay in government for perpetually, rig the elections and ignores the participation of the people. And so it's an analysis of the Nigerian electoral process, or analysts of the Nigerian electoral process are of the opinion that rigging was not new in Nigeria. And what was perhaps new, particularly of the 2003 and 2007 election, was the brazeness and the unintelligent manner the elections were carried out. Now, the nature of election rigging in Nigeria has disastrous consequences for democracy because it deprives the people of electing candidates of their choices and a government which, by electoral malpractice, keeps itself in office against the votes of the majority of the electorate. And so, and he outlines a whole lot of consequences, but I'm going to just read one. So from the standpoint of political parties and their candidates, rigging deprives election of its character as a competition in which all the contestants can equally aspire to win, where the capacity of the contestants to rig is very unequal because one of them is in a position of irresistible influence over the electoral body and has power of control and direction over the organized cohesive force of the country, represented by the police, has vastly greater resources of money and patronage then the other contestants have no real chance of winning. So an election in these circumstances cannot be a competition in any meaningful sense of the word. An election contest in which the result is not determined by the votes lawfully cast for the contestants, but by the fraudulent manipulation is a mockery of the idea of a competition. Therefore, without a free competition, power politics loses its essence. And so that in conclusion, so democracy has had severe setbacks in Nigerians' political evolution, and the continuous suppression of the press, muzzling up of civil rights organizations, and detention without trial, manipulation of electoral and judicial systems to achieve specific objectives by political leaders has been the bane of democracy in Nigeria's transitional programs. Most of all, attempts at democratic governance then proves futile as the difference among the political class remains diametrically at variance. And the inability of politicians to forge a united front against undemocratic forces often see political activists resorting to ethnic and religious sentiments to achieve their desired objectives. So that is the conclusion the writer reaches.
Lecture with Kaduna State University. Now, I would like to borrow the words of David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, when he was describing ISIS. He said that these people are not Muslims, they are monsters. And that's the same thing with the Boko Haram issue. Now, if you look at Boko Haram, the history of insurgency in Nigeria dates quite as far back as the 1980s. Metasine came from Cameroon all the way to Kano. And they could do that because of our porous borders. Boko Haram has survived because of lack of leadership and total collapse of the Nigerian system. The day those girls were kidnapped, the president was in Kano dancing. So it sends a negative signal to the entire Nigerian community. Our borders are porous, we have corruption, we have Boko Haram everywhere, there's lack of interest, on the issue itself. And I'm even hearing something very new, that there is oil in that region. So they will continue to destabilize that region as much as possible. Now, the papers presented here should look at the history of insurgency in Nigeria and give us a way forward. I can tell you now, the northern governors, where I come from, they've been very particular about having visitors coming to settle. They're awareing people that you should be aware of anybody that's coming. In fact, if you're giving your house up for rent, you'll be held responsible if that house houses insurgents. We've had that in Zaria, where people's property have been confiscated. They're in problems because they just give their rent to anybody. Kano State has been able to tackle insurgency. Boko Haram has tried so much to get into Kano, and they have not been successful because Kano State government stood firm on Boko Haram. So any foreign visitor coming to settle, it's an issue. So I think the papers should actually look at the history of insurgency in Nigeria and maybe give us a way forward. Thank you.
So, thank you. Next, can you project, or do you need the microphone? And then who else? So, okay, wait, there's so many. Can we go?
Thank you.
We'll go way back there, and then one over here next, and there, okay?
Thank you very much. I think I want to address all the presentation concerning Boko Haram. I wouldn't know how many people are very familiar with the Niger Delta region and all that, and then you will see amount of devastation, denuded, vegetation, degradation of the environment and all that. And then you see trees beheaded, looking sickly and all that. And then somebody may ask, how do we save these trees? We don't start from treating the foliage, that is the leaves, or the trunk. We start from the root. And then what my colleague there that asked the question first or made some comments actually hit that on the nail, on the head. Now, the fact is this. What is the root, or what are the causes of Boko Haram? I think we must first of all look at the lifestyle of the so-called low-income and zero-income earners, particularly in the core north. Some of them, or many of them, do not have jobs, and yet they marry 3, 4 wives, and then they have a forest of children uncatered for. And the next thing is, the moment the child is 3 years old, is handed over to the cleric, who, the excuse is they want to teach them, Quranic education and all that. And by the time that child is 11 years old, of course, you find street urchins, street children and all that. They are easy recruit for this kind of insurgency. Now, the problem is this. How do we tackle it? And I know that most of the papers actually brought out issues on the solution. But I see this as immediate solution, but they don't last. The lasting solution is probably to appropriate the culture that is on ground. Well, if we cannot educate the parents about family planning or whatever, at least let us tackle the cleric and the informal schools. Let us upgrade them. Let us bring them together as a school. And in addition to Quranic education, let us equip them with skills. Because most often, apart from the clerics teaching them Quran and all that, they lack skills. And in the end, they become very irrelevant economically. They have no skill, and then they are not even wanted in the society. And therefore, they take this on the society. Anyone that is able to recruit them, they are ready to attack that same society that they think has victimized them or has robbed them of opportunities to live. So I think if we are able to do this, and then these clerics, let us turn their informal education to formal education and pay them salaries. Let government intervene. So that probably may be one of the lasting solutions. So thank you very much.
Are you commenting or is it a question?
Thank you very much. Mine is a very quick one.
It was for him.
Oh,
Gotta move. Okay, go for it.
okay, I didn't see him, sorry. I just want to say that one of the missing aspects of the presentations is the link between the escalation in Boko Haram activities and the NATO invasion of Libya, the supply of arms and mercenaries from Libya. So I think that's a very critical aspect of the Boko Haram insurgency that needs to be emphasized. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Adekunle from UKZ in South Africa. I will be very fast. Firstly, I think it will be somehow erroneous to limit the origination and the activities of Boko Haram to PDP. That's the ruling party in Nigeria. That's trivializing Boko Haram. It's beyond the ruling party, and we know that there are evidences of that, firstly. Secondly, it will also be somehow to say that the intention of Boko Haram is good at origination. No, it can never be good. Why? We need to look at the characters of the founder of Boko Haram, and that was Yusuf. Yusuf was a political thug used by the governors of the state to perpetuate electoral violence, and when they got to power, they cut him off. So he shifted attention to terrorism and violence. It's more than that, but that's the only thing I can say for now. Thirdly, then the sporadic evolution of terrorism perpetuated by Boko Haram goes beyond the death of Yusuf. Of course, we know that the Nigerian security operatives killed him in an extrajudicial manner. It coincided with the global Islamic fundamentalists across the world. So it's a wind that was blowing, and Boko Haram was caught in the middle of the wind. Then thirdly, it may also be, maybe you have, I'm speaking to the first presenter, to rethink your conclusion that tried to say that they were fighting to protect their interest. My question is, which interest? Is it the abolition of westernization that will be an interest of individual within a state? Or is it the promotion or the adoption or the seeming implementation of Sharia law that Boko Haram were protecting? Can we call that an interest in a secular state like Nigeria? Then the second presenter, that's Mr. Osondu Solomon. I think you created 3 levels, which you were talking about the Commonwealth individual. I think it would be very good if you can create another level talking about externality, especially the nexus between security and development, when you need to talk about the exit of foreign direct investment, especially in the northern Nigeria. Then lastly, the man that spoke on politics, political elasticity theory. It sounds very nice, of course. And now my question is, you raise it also, that how do you manage between consensus and competition? But I know in third world countries, especially Nigeria that you focus on, the people did not evolve with democracy. They only started with liberal and market-oriented democracy. So it will be difficult for them to imbibe the culture of consensus. They are only living at the time of globalization, which deals with competition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, this is hard. Quickly.
Ideho is the name, from Lee City University, Ibadan. I was quite happy when Dan Fulani came up with his intervention. That actually spoke my mind. The analysts tend to develop their pieces on this so-called, on the old theory of Ted Gore on why men rebel. Men rebel because this is absent. Men rebel because this was not provided by society. Men rebel because this and that did not happen. Mass poverty, unemployment, and so on and so forth. But he is saying, and I'm agreeing with him, that men rebel because the space for rebellion was provided. The government of the day said that PDP, Boko Haram was in their cabinet. Not a single member of the cabinet was removed for Boko Haram activities. Now, because election was coming, and it was becoming embarrassing for government, within 6 weeks, they contained Boko Haram. So wherever there's political will, you won't have that kind of nonsensical insurgencies. Look at you mentioned the Biafran revolution. It was not a rebellion, it was a revolution. Even that, as neat as it was, there was a political will of the Gowon government to put an end to it. They crushed it. The other one, Maitasini, they not only crushed Maitasini because there was political will, they chased them into Chad. In fact, the head of the division was about being court-martial before he came back to Nigeria. The other one, Niger Delta. You remember that week in Port Harcourt, when for the first time people saw helicopter gunships. Then they saw that government was serious about putting an end to that insurgency. The stick came before the carrot as far as Niger Delta insurgency was concerned, so they contained it. Now Boko Haram. It was important to understand that government had need to encourage the insurgency. When girls were taken, the first thing government said was that no girl was missing. But when it became important that they could also gain from the insurgency, they now began to look for support from within the region and outside the country to fight Boko Haram. When they spent all the money that was given by the National Assembly, they even asked to borrow $1 billion. Maybe this money was meant to fight election. So I think in sum total, insurgency of this kind only occur where the space for it is provided by government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Diwali Agboyaju is my name. I teach political science at the University of Ibadan. Mine is just a word of caution for almost all the presenters. As academics, we should try as much as possible to avoid generalizations that cannot be substantiated. Most of the presenters were guilty of this. Take, for instance, somebody calling jihad a holy war. Certainly, no war is holy. Jihad means effort, and it starts with the individual who is involved. I can continue with that. So many generalizations. Thank you very much.
Yes. Who wants to go first? Will.
Thank you very much. I want to say that one, that the Boko Haram group did not want to secede from Nigeria is incorrect. The moment they decided to have a caliphate, Islamic caliphate, and they capture 17 or local governments, it is a direct secession from the country. They were saying they wanted to apply Islamic rules in their domain, which is contrary to the 1999 Constitution as amended. Secondly, the radicalization of Islamic belief by this group can be contained through the process of education. When the missionaries came to Nigeria, they went to the rural areas, and people gave a lot of resistance. But with persuasion and training and education, they became something that we now call Western education that we are proud of. There's no individual that cannot be re-educated. That's why we said the mindset must be addressed. Thank you.
I'd like to quickly correct the notion raised by my brother down there who said that it was insinuated that at inception, Boko Haram had good intention. I think I clearly stated the fact that the Yusufia sect started out of, as a result of a political talk, who was dissatisfied with his masters and saw an opportunity to retaliate. And like every other person have stated here, that space was created and they took hold of it. Then that Boko Haram protects Sharia. I think you really need to go and read the Sharia law. The Sharia law does not allow you to take the life of anybody. And people who see Boko Haram as perpetrators of Islam need to read the Hadiths and the Quran. The Quran does not allow you to kill a snake that crawls into your bedroom. Islam says, plead with it to live and allow it to stay for 3 days. If it refuses to leave, then it is an enemy that needs to be attacked. So there is the need, people who see Islam on the surface and adjudge it to be evil should take their time off to please read the basic tenets of Islam. I was born and bred a Christian. I am a Muslim today. I know that the two religion does not perpetrate violence. Thank you.
Yeah, let me respond to my brother. Your direct question was between Boko Haram and corruption, which one should be considered anti-development? I want to say this. Let me put it this way. There is corruption in Nigeria. There is corruption in the northeastern part of Nigeria, where Boko Haram has crystallized. The corruption in Nigeria, in the northeastern part of Nigeria, never closed down schools. Corruption in northeastern Nigeria never abducted over 200 girls from schools. Corruption in the northeastern Nigeria never entered churches to shoot people. It never entered markets to kill people. It never forced businesses to close. You can name it. And mind you, these injuries of Boko Haram was being inflicted against their own people, even though they were people who were caught in the crossfire. Why was it that the eastern part of Nigeria were able to survive the civil war? It was because they were fighting an enemy not within, but without. But the Boko Haram circulated their people. Could you remember that even when the military was trying to crush them, they shot their wives? They brought out all their wives and shot them because they didn't want any other person to share their wives when they must have died. So there is no way comparing Boko Haram and, in fact, to reverse what Boko Haram has done in the northeastern Nigeria would be very difficult. To reverse it. How many schools were raised? Over 900 schools in Borno State alone. You're not talking of Yobe. You're not talking of Jigawa. You're not talking of what is happening in Adamawa. You're not talking of what happened in Kanu. The motor pass where they entered to kill people. You know, the mosques. They entered mosques. Even the current president, the president-elect, was attacked. If not that he was in, yes, in a bulletproof car, he must have died before now. So the comparison, it does not arise for me. It does not.
Okay, good. Do you have comments? Do you have a comment? Do you have a comment? Okay.
Thank you very much for your comments. I'm not coming to your defense as such. Yeah, but I just want to say that I think he was asking a question in terms of Boko Haram and corruption. He's not saying that they're equivalent. Yeah, which one, yeah, rhetorical, which one destroys the society most? Yeah, and let me also caution, like our brother did a while ago, the Boko Haram insurgency is still emerging. It has not ended.
So we'll have opportunities to write millions and millions of pages about whether this is correct, is PDP, or it was a tug or no tug. It's just an evolving process. So that's for that. As regards to my paper on political elasticity theory, I want to say that what the theory is essentially talking about is that we should strike a balance between partisanship and statesmanship. We should strike a balance between competition and consensus. That is what it is saying. Yeah. And the other thing about Francis Fukuyama, I have read Francis Fukuyama. I have almost all his books on my shelf in my office. What he did in The End of History and The Last Man was a stock taking of who won the ideological war between the East and the West. And he came to the conclusion that since most of the Eastern European bloc countries are now democracies, it looks like liberal democratic principles and free market ideas, they have triumphed at the end of the day. But the bad news for Fukuyama is that history has not ended yet. What do we see in most parts of the world, including the United States? Democracies are becoming more autocratic, than they are supposed to be. And finally, talking about liberal democracy and free market principles in the context of Africans, that is what they were used to because it's globalization. That is very true, but we don't have to go that way. That is what we get from the political elasticity theory. Lee Kuan Yew, who passed away a few weeks ago, will you call him an autocrat or a democrat? He was both. He was both, yeah. He was a benevolent dictator, yes. That is, yes, thank you very much. An autocratic democrat. So what we are saying is that you bring attributes of persuasion and attributes of coercion in your relationship with the people. And that is the only way you can get development done. So I think that is exactly what I was trying to correct here.